Welcome everybody to another That Word Chat. It's good to see everybody. Actually, I was just saying, I usually don't go through the list of faces and names because I'm just busy with other things, and so I never really know who's in the audience. Interestingly, today we had a crisis where I forgot to make Heather the host, and I had to find her. So I had to scroll through everybody. So it's great to see all the familiar names and faces. Really quick before we start today, we have a new feature for we have live transcript with Otter AI, OTTER, and you'll see it at the top of your screen. You can click on that. I think we're not sure how it works yet. It's new, but it's live transcripts, live captioning. It's supposed to be 80% effective, which is pretty much what you would expect of a copy editor, right? About 80% effective. If you click on it, apparently you have to actually sign up. When I clicked, it just took me right to it. But it's really cool. You can watch along and look at and watch the mistakes if you like. But hopefully, it's a benefit for those of us who need that who need that extra help to see rather than hear, because I can be hard to understand at times. Today we have Cynthia Williams, and this is great. Cynthia is business and technical editing manager at Dragonfly Editorial, which is only a stone's throw from me, the world headquarters in Tip City, Ohio, just west of here. Um, Cynthia, have you actually been to the world headquarters of um, Dragonfly Editorial?
I haven't been, not yet. No, I've
Because
been.
today would be a great day. To,
Is
have
it,
you had much snow
I was
to
about to
deal
say,
with?
is it
Ice?
just heavy snow? Yes. No, I was getting excited about maybe we had like 3 or 4 inches in Baltimore last week, and I was very excited thinking about how pretty it sounds. And then Sam at headquarters told me, "Oh, we got 8 inches." I was like, "Oh, okay."
Well, see, okay, so I'm confused. So you're in Baltimore now?
I'm in Baltimore. We all work remotely, so there are
Yeah.
like maybe 3 or 4 people who work at headquarters. And then the
Okay.
rest of us are all over. We're in Tennessee, we're in um, Baltimore, there's another person in Maryland and Houston. We're all over
Hmm.
the place.
Okay. So I had somewhere I saw you listed as being in Los Angeles. Were you in Los Angeles before?
I was in Los Angeles for a year and a half. It was quite
Okay.
an adventure.
Was it?
Yes, we moved out there for my partner's job, and
Mhm.
we just we were not prepared for the culture shock. We
Oh
moved
yeah.
from DC, so we moved from DC to LA. Um, and yeah, we had a lot of fun, but when it was time to move, we were like, oh, it would just feel so comfortable. And I'm from New Orleans, so
Yeah.
happy Mardi Gras to everybody from New Orleans out there.
Right.
Um, but
38 degrees apparently in New Orleans.
I know. So that's crazy too. It's like it's colder there than it is here.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we were in LA for just a hot second, and then when we got back here, we moved here in the middle of a snowstorm, and for some reason that felt very natural to me, even though I'm not mid Atlantic at all.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So Dragonfly Editorial I want to ask you about what you do there and what that's all about. You're also you're freelance as well, or maybe through Dragonfly, but you've been doing it for 20 years. You're from New Orleans originally. Your bio tells us corporate communications and climate change, community capacity building, good governance, healthcare, social science. A lot of cool, meaty things. I think I saw in your ACES interview that the thing you love about copy editing is learning about new things, which is my answer all the time when people
Yeah.
say, "Why are you a copy editor?"
Yeah.
Oh my God, there's so many things you learn. But you're also doing your side thing is that this great blog outside the book, and I think I saw like 39 interviews you've done on there of editors of color, all of them kind of exploring a different aspect of editing and and the editing community. So let's talk about it. How did you get started doing that? What prompted that?
Yeah. Well, I had the idea for it maybe like 2 years before I actually started it. Uh, and I was just thinking, because I was freelancing at the time, and just thinking, how are people coming into the editing profession? Like, how do they even know where to get started? And I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how I got started, which was I started in book publishing, and had a wonderful mentor there at my first job. And I just thought, are these kinds of opportunities still out there? And so I wanted to know like what I could do to help, especially, for people coming in like myself as like a young person of color or an older person of color, how you would, learn about the field. But, I kind of didn't want to, this is something I'm always thinking about outside the book, like what would people come to the site for? And there's places out there where you can learn about, like there's Grammar Girl where you can learn about language and things like that. So I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
really know like how people approach the job. So that's kind of where my questions, that's where they pour forth from. The like, how do you approach a job? What do what are your processes when you do the job? Because I've always been, well, most of the time I've been the lone editor in my department. So I'm like, how are other people doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's the main reason I started the blog, but also thinking about being, the lone person of color in an organization, and the challenges and, like, benefits and challenges, but, what that experience is like, and kind of highlighting that in a, more open space for, other people of color, or, people who are not people of color, white
Mm-hmm.
people, or,
Right. Right.
to learn about too.
So yeah, a lot of the questions you're asking are general questions. Where do you find your community? Where do you actually? The interesting thing is that all the interviews are different questions. It's not like you have a standard
Well,
list of questions.
the copy editor, like the seasoned copy editors, they all get the same questions, and then I just added some new questions for students and
Uh-huh.
for
Oh, okay.
professors. So, but the copy editors all get the same. They get the same ones. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So what have you learned? You've done, am I right? 39 interviews? Is that
It's 30.
about
It's makes 30
30?
today. So I think what you saw was
Okay.
the 29th. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yes, I've done 30 interviews, and um I think I've just learned, that copy editors are very, I don't want to say, well, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say earnest, but they're very caring about what they do, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not,
Yeah.
I find that it's not a, obviously people have a stereotype of editors as, kind of like, school marms or something like that. But I find that people are really like sincere, and just really, let's say they bring a vulnerability to the work that they do. And I appreciate that, just the way they talk about their work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wasn't prepared for how the Indian editing community embraced the site. And so that was like opened up a
Oh.
whole nother door to, folks that I hadn't, heard of or heard about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and learning about their experiences. And that's been really rewarding. Let's see. So one thing that was also on the technical side that surprised me is that there are not a lot of, in the interviews that I do, there are not a lot of people who say that they use, like Adobe stamps or Perfected and things like this when they do their job. And I thought, well, that's strange, because when I was a freelancer, I just thought everybody was out here using Perfected, and I was like the latecomer and needed to get on it or something.
Yeah.
So, but so that's one of the surprising things to me, was that people are like, nope, I work in Word, or I work in Adobe, but I just use the comments, or
Right. Well,
um
it's interesting to hear.
yeah.
We don't, that's the thing. In copy editing, we often work by ourselves and we don't ask those questions or have that discussion.
Yeah,
So,
and I mean, at base, we don't need a whole lot to do our job, so we have a lot of bells and whistles at our disposal if we need to. Yeah.
right, right. Yeah. So, so is there a dearth of editors of color?
Mhm.
I mean, what I don't know if we can quantify it, but
Right.
is there a dearth, and why is there a dearth?
Yeah, one of the interviewees, he sent a link with his interview to some stats from the labor department, and I think it
Mm-hmm.
was stats on edit of people who, I guess qualify themselves or describe themselves as editors, and the breakdown by race. I think there was a breakdown by race, and it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of people of color. Um, but I definitely don't have the answers, I
Right.
think.
Right.
But um, I think that one of the things I was saying in the ACEs webinar is that a lot of it is visibility and opportunity, because like I was
Mm-hmm.
saying, a lot of students who are coming out of English programs or journalism programs, the most of them, well, a lot of them may not have actual job experience. Maybe they've done an internship, but if they show up at the job, sometimes the student from an HBCU, because the person who's hiring you might not see a likeness in experience, then they think that maybe you're going to be harder to train, or you just don't have the
Mm-hmm.
tools, or it's
Right.
who we see promise in also.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a major hurdle as far as like increasing diversity, because I also think that if that person has the fundamentals, like fundamentals of grammar to do the job, a lot of editing you learn just by doing it. So you take that person on, and it might be more work culturally for you to cross that bridge, or um but that's I feel like that is part of the work of diversifying the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be uncomfortable for the person doing it, for the person who is I guess in the higher part of the power dynamic. It's going to be
Right.
harder for that person to, they've got to do some stretching too. So
Right.
I think
Right.
that's part of it. Yeah.
So let's talk about. I don't know if you've been interviewed. You do a lot of you do presentations. You've written. You've done your have stuff online that you've written about. I don't know if you've ever been the subject of an outside the book
Mhm.
style interview, but I should call up the questions and ask you them. But
Yeah.
what tell us about your experience. You said starting out you had a mentor.
Yeah.
Was it did you have what difficulties did you have as a person of color going into this field that is not exclusively but predominantly white and I don't want to say male because that's probably not true, but it depends on the industry.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I worked for 6 years in book publishing, and, um, lucky for me, two people from the only publisher in town in New Orleans, um, only book publisher, came to my editing and publishing class, and they said that they were looking for interns. And so I applied, and
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the internship, like, that turned into a job. And so it was just a very fortunate series of events for me. But so that's how I started. But it was one of those experiences that it's like a bunch of benefits and challenges all rolled up in one. And it was a kind of an extreme case, I think, of where there were two people of color in the office, but there's so you're learning all this stuff. I have this great mentor. The editor in chief is great, and I'm learning all these things about editing. But the book list, also includes like books like you know lauding Jefferson Davis, and just all these Confederacy type books.
Oh,
And so
geez.
you're like, oh, I got 60 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, because this
Yeah.
job is great, but great. So, oh, I think my lighting is, the sun is going down.
I, I,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
it's going down a little bit, but it's you're actually sparkly because there's some. It's a
I
sunny
like
day
it.
by the look of it outside, so it's a
Yeah.
good look.
um,
Um, Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, that was kind of the things that I had to keep in my head, that, I'm learning a lot on the job, but there's just mentally you have to do a lot of compartmentalizing to, block out the stuff that's not,
Right.
you know, optimal
Right.
for a work environment.
Right. And that's something that I mean, I can't. I can obviously relate to it in some levels of being, not fitting into a culture, but I can't relate to not fitting into a culture because of the color of my skin. So it's fascinating to me to think about that the perspective you bring to the job. I mean, you can see that a press might in the South might be looking for um, history that is of the South and therefore is of the Civil War, and but there's, if you don't see black people in the office, it's easy to for the presses to forget that's part of the history too, and that's
Yeah,
taken
and I,
advantage
I
of.
mean, and I will say that this was it, this was not this was not like objective history. This was uh,
Yeah.
history in praise of uh, the Confederacy. But I will say too
Mhm.
that, so one of the things is it's cultural, but it's also this so right, so it's cultural in the sense that I've, as a person of color who, may know some things from the mainstream culture, there's certain things that I don't know, but I have to know in order to, be social at the potluck, or, I mean, if everybody's
Mm.
talking about the Rolling Stones, I got to get in that conversation in some way to make myself friendly,
Right.
so there's a lot of things like that, if you're 24, 23, and just coming into that, you're like, okay, how do I make myself sociable when nobody's talking about the things that I know to talk about? So people might just think that you're really quiet, but you're not
Hmm.
really quiet. You just kind
Right.
of don't know how to add your 2 cents into these conversations yet.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. And right. And so when you said you had some uh, mentorship, and was it a person of color who was the mentor, or was it mainly a white um, office, and you had to
yeah,
look for?
yeah, mainly white office, and it was only myself and the editor in chief, and
Okay.
I think her family was from the Netherlands, but she was, I don't want to put her on the spot and say her name, but she was magnificent. She was the best mentor that a person could have coming into the field. Just as far as telling you where the resources were, and like checking your work after you to, kind of say, oh, well, this, I would do this differently or whatever, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Yeah, she was not a person of color. And that's the other thing that, I feel like this is probably something that works to the advantage of all young people in an office. But so I found myself, right, like having these mentors in the editing department who were largely white women, um, and finding other Black women within the organization who were also mentors in a different way, because I had never been like, working in an office. Like when I was in college,
Right.
I worked at Walgreens. So I didn't really have these experiences. So finding like other women of color in the office to kind of pull different things from, right? Like, and I think everybody does that. You pull different things from
Yeah.
different people. Um, so yeah, that was what my mentorship experience was like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what is the message there for people in the office in terms of that mentorship? Is there something you'd like to see in those situations where, for the editors who actually work in an office, and many do, um, is there something that people who are allies can do to help um, young editors of color feel comfortable in the role and also stay with it and not feel,
Yeah.
somehow that it's not for them for some reason.
Yeah. For the people who are thinking of taking on a mentorship role, and I mean, things that was, 20 years ago, things have changed so
Yeah,
much, but I would
sure.
think that, you know, I think to me, what was most valuable was having a non-judgmental person come behind me, or this agreement that we were going to do this, you do this, and then I'll look after you and review it, and we can talk about where I would have done something differently from what you did, or you missed something. And just having that like non-judgmental space for somebody to actually take me through it, uh
Mm-hmm.
it meant a lot. And I don't think a lot of people today, a lot of people who are just starting out, get that level of feedback.
Yeah.
um and so I think that could, I think it works across the board. But if you're, um, so one, I would say, don't let your like personal biases limit who you're seeing potential in, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
editors walk through the door with like zero, zero experience, but they're learning on the job. And then when you
Mm-hmm.
get that person there, you know, or even if, it's a person who you're reaching out to as a mentor, potential mentor, um, and you're not hiring them, offer to, look over or review some of their projects to kind of walk
Right.
them through the process. I think that's the most useful thing for me is, am I doing this right? Am I looking at this right? And having somebody who's experienced in it say, well, yeah, you're on the right track, and catch this thing, because it's, editing is an art, as much as it is a science, obviously. So having somebody say, hey, well, you want to look out for this thing too, or these things, they can be tricky, but I would lay off on this one, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And are you getting some of those messages from the outside the book project and talking with editors?
I just added a question that says something like, what kind of lessons would you like to have learned when you were just starting, or
Oh
something
yeah.
like that, so that I can kind of get to that part of the equation. Because some people will talk about their early experiences, but it's just kind of by happenstance through the interview. So I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to get more into like, what were your first experiences like, and what helps somebody who's just starting. um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think as I reach out to more students, some of that will also become apparent in like today's environment. Because I mean, like I said, stuff is so much has changed. I can't
Yeah.
imagine entering the profession, and entering the professional world right now, like as a 20 something, as anxiety ridden as I am, and as I was in 2004 or 2003 or whatever. um yeah, I could just imagine myself being that much worse today.
Have that's interesting. Let's talk about that. Is it because I would think that what we've seen in response to the events of last summer was kind of it was an empowering, positive view of, I think a realization by a lot of organizations that it's not enough just to say, yes, we're colorblind, we support black people. No, you can't just do that. You have to go that extra step to make up for the fact for this horrible history that we've had. So, is it empowering for young people? Do you think, or like you said, stressful?
Yeah, I think it is empowering, empowering, and what do I want to say? Um, I would say I don't think the stress is a new thing. That's what I would say. And I
Mm,
think
mm,
you can have the stress and still really not know how to move forward. Um, there was the major HBCU here is Morgan State University, and there was an advertising firm, um, last summer when everything was happening. They partnered with Morgan State to, I think they're regularly bringing in students from Morgan State to give them actual experience at the ad agency. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, I mean, like I was talking about how hard it is to mix, you're not actually mixing, I don't want to say if you're mixing cultures, but to get to a place like after this summer where you say, this is my experience as a, person of color in a primarily white working space. And then so you get to a space where you have that, it's out in the open, and you know that there are challenges, but then you say, okay, well, where do we go from here, right? Like, we've aired the dirty laundry, and where do we go from
Mm-hmm.
here? um and I think there's so many things that play into that. It's the opportunity, right? So like this ad agency giving students an opportunity to get into that field, but also, our biases against African American vernacular English, right? Like, if I went to
Right.
my job and spoke, you know, kind of the way I do around my family, people would think that I couldn't do my job.
Oh, yeah.
And, and I think it's, the same for people with like country accents or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that, being an editor is different from being just a human in the South, just a person. So I can do
Right.
this job and I don't have to speak proper English, every second of my life. Um, so, I think it's personal biases also that, just allowing people to be more of themselves, but recognizing that just because that self is different from you, or just because you've seen on TV these stereotypes again about this presentation of a self, doesn't mean that this person is less qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, I think I think in the actual workspace and working with each other, I think that's a big part of it, like getting used to um, the difference of the other person and welcoming all
Right.
that into the workspace. And I think, I mean, that ties into what we consider professional and everything else, right? um I was reading something recently, I think it was from Mel Edits, about professionalism, and one of the people in the thread had commented about um Indian women changing their dress because what they were comfortable in going into the office was seen as unprofessional
Mm-hmm.
by the people in the office. And it's just things as simple as
Mm-hmm.
that's just kind of make people close themselves up and then still have to worry about doing the job. That's just really challenging.
Right. Right. So how long were you in at your first job? And you went to Los Angeles after that? Or, no, you went to
Oh
DC.
no,
You said.
it's been
Yeah.
quite a journey.
You've
Yeah.
been around.
Yeah. So I was at the job in New Orleans for 3 years, and then I spent 3 years in Baton Rouge at Louisiana State University Press. And so it was like some trade publishing, and then I got to do some university press stuff. And then I went back to school and got a master of public administration.
Oh yeah, I
And
wanted to ask you about that. Yeah.
yeah, so after that, I went to DC and I started working. I actually worked for as a research assistant for a little while, and then I started working as an editor at Public Citizen. And so that was more, like short newsletters or short reports, and it was mostly medical stuff. But yeah, and then I went back to Atlanta. Atlanta is
Oh,
where I got my got my grad degree, and then I went back to Atlanta and worked as a research associate again, and then I went back to DC and worked as an editor, and then I left to go to LA.
mm,
A lot of moving.
yeah.
People are happy. I've been in Baltimore for 2 years now, and settled.
Right.
But yeah, so when I moved to LA, that was when I started freelancing. And I wasn't prepared for how much I would like it, and like the part about, marketing myself and, well, networking as much as I could online. I don't know about networking in person, but I really did enjoy
Mm,
that part of the work. Yeah.
right. So are you editing? Is most of your editing at what we would maybe call standard English, and sort of is there? Do you have you? I'm thinking about my backgrounds in newspapers, and it's very interesting that you have newspapers that have a very small number of minority uh, reporters and especially editors, and there's an obvious sort of direct response when you have a bunch of white people reporting the news, and very often in a urban area, in a black community, and there's that disconnect there. And I wonder, is that if that enters into your experience at all, or has it been not quite that obvious where you're dealing with the different registers, and you mentioned African American vernacular English, and um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not, so my work experience hasn't been close to the journalism world. But
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely read about that kind of stuff, especially when we were dealing with we are dealing with the detention centers. And I was in LA, and, um, you know, which all this reporting was happening about the kids and, the separation of the families, but a lot of it wasn't being done by the Latino community.
Right.
So yeah, so yeah, I'm aware of those types of issues in the news world, but I it hasn't really come into play editing wise in the stuff that I've been working on,
Mm-hmm.
or been working around. I found once I started freelancing, I found that I didn't like working on books as much as I liked working on, short research reports and that kind of thing. So I do still freelance. It's projects are few and far between because with I'm working at Dragonfly now, and I don't get
Yeah.
to do a whole lot of editing there. But it's more of a department head type role, so I'm not really, I just don't have a whole lot of time to devote to it. But
Mm-hmm.
those projects are the projects that I do take, about climate change and good governance and things like that. They kind of keep me close to things that I care about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Um, so what is your you said you don't do a lot of copy editing at Dragonfly. It's sort of you're dealing with the inflow and outflow of projects, and you're more of a project manager. Is that the
Yeah. These
yeah.
days I play Tetris a whole lot. So
Oh, really?
oh, I'm like stacking up pieces and waiting for
Yeah.
that
You,
long piece to make everything
right.
fit together.
Not literally. I thought you
Right.
meant you're actually sitting there waiting for work to come in and playing
Right.
Tetris.
Yes, playing Tetris. No,
Yeah.
so yeah, so we have two full-time editors and we have a roster of contractors. And so most of our, we edit a lot of proposals in the healthcare field, a lot of finance stuff. Kind of runs the gamut. We have like nonprofit communications type stuff. And yeah, so I'm managing a team of editors getting, to fulfill projects. Um, so yeah, it's mostly management these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I just noticed a question in the chat that seems like a good time to ask this. And if you have any questions for Cynthia, please just type query in the chat, and we'll call on you and get you to ask your question on camera for everybody else to see. And I'm curious if you have questions. It's great if you have an experience to add to this. If you're an editor of color and you have a story or an experience, let us know that too. Um, so Mary Jane has a query. Oh, I'm sorry. You said can't turn camera on due to wonky Wi-Fi. So I'll ask for Mary Jane. She asks, does Cynthia think the definition of proper English will be more fluid in the future, and do you hope so?
Hmm.
Good
Um,
question for an editor.
yeah. I That's a sticky wicket. I was, I think just an editor conversation, I would hope that in informal conversations, I would hope that the term proper English was just kind of gone. But
Yeah.
um, but I also realize when we're working on certain projects, right, we edit to standard English. Um, so, and I don't think that that's going to be something that goes away anytime soon. But I think that I was reading this article recently on Inside Higher Education, uh, and it just had all these amazing resources in it that I hope to dig into about biases. What did it call? Linguistic bias, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just talking about more of what I was saying is, recognizing that African American vernacular or other kinds of vernacular different. They're different Englishes, like Aisha Chari says, Indian Englishes. They're different Englishes.
Right. Right.
Um, and they all have a structure to them. It's not just like willy-nilly saying, anything. Um, and so I feel like what I would hope in the coming years is for us to, as editors, kind of let go of this identity that we feel like we have to
Mm-hmm.
have all our ducks in a row and have everything like, you know, um, perfect in every aspect of our lives. Like it's okay if we don't have to be the kind of people who can't read a menu without complaining about a missing comma. We don't have to be that
Right.
way. So
Right.
so that's what I
Right.
would hope, that we could find some kind of middle ground, understanding that we're editing to a standard, but not like,
Mm-hmm.
shunning the other things.
Right. Right. And I suppose, I would add that for certain audiences to, if you're not speaking to that audience, then, or if that audience's voice doesn't fit your standard view, then you're basically excluding that audience.
Yeah, yeah,
There are places to be this to have standard, and there are places to recognize that that there are different forms of English. Um,
I agree.
so what's the feedback been for outside the book?
Um, it's been generally good. I mean, usually I get a contact, comment, specific comment to my email address every now and then, and people are, um, appreciative of the highlighting of different experiences. But I feel like in
Mm-hmm.
general, it's been received pretty well in the editing community, and I've been,
Yeah.
very appreciative of that. People have boosted, different editors' stories, and there's been a lot of like feedback in the comments about, points that people will bring up. I'm still I'm still lacking in actually getting into that recent grad student world, but I've
Mm-hmm.
done a lot more about that lately. So I've highlighted some
Yeah.
students, but I definitely, that was the whole reason for the site. So I want to do more of that, of reaching out to students, getting their
Mm.
experiences, and, possibly connecting students to actual opportunities.
Oh.
I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
sure how to take that leap yet. But that's definitely one of my goals, to kind of see that, students of color will see, like, that outside the book will make editing visible as a vocation for students of color, but also that, in some way they can be connected to opportunities. Um,
Right.
like that non-judgmental hand to kind of walk them through, this is how you become an editor, that kind of.
Yeah. So you have so this is a big mentorship thing. I mean, you have your goal here is to be a mentor for young people entering the field who can um, gain the knowledge, gain the helping hand.
Yeah, and to see, because I think a lot of people, whether you're a person of color or not, you kind of fall into editing. Like, oh yeah, I didn't set out to do this,
Yeah.
but this is where I ended up. So, I think just like one of the medical editors I was interviewing said, she sees a space for science majors to be exposed to editing, to know that it's, something that, a profession that they could enter if they're not, doing actual science either. So yeah, just
Right,
all the ways
right.
you can enter the profession. Yeah.
Um, it, you have a master's in public administration. What was the motivation there?
Well, as I said, I am an anxiety ridden person. And I was doing, I was editing and I was just thinking, I don't know if I'm, good at this, and I don't know if this is enough. I mean,
Hmm.
the wages are in the salaries in book publishing, at
Yeah.
that time for, for a person just starting out were so low. And I was just thinking,
Hmm.
oh, maybe if I went back to grad school, I could get some real skills. And and I could become a data person. Um, yes,
Aha.
this was really
And how has that gone?
that I tried twice to be a research assistant and a data
Uh,
person. Um, and I kept wondering, well, when are they going to ask me to write reports? Because I can do writing, I can't do data. So,
right.
so, but it was an interesting experience because I'm not an everything happens for a reason type of person, but that experience of reading research papers and everything, it kind of shifted my focus away from books and let me know what material I was more comfortable with reading and editing, and the kind of material that I wanted to work on. So it actually was a good prep experience for the editing work that I did post graduate degree, because then I went into more issues that were timely and shorter material. And so it just kind of helped me to make that transition. So right now, like, what I was doing as a freelancer and at Dragonfly is kind of merging those experiences. So like merging the experience that I got with book editing and just everything that I had got from that mentor at that time, and blending that with the more, researchy type experience I had as a grad student. So
Hmm.
now working on these shorter materials, I kind of, because one of the things, if we're talking about like bringing people into the editing profession and having a frame of reference for things. When I first started editing, I and I it's a good thing I know this author personally, and I've apologized to him and he's been so gracious, but that was the first review that featured a book that I edited, and it was the the review was glowing. It was a long Sunday review, you know 75% of the page in the book section, um, about this book that I'd edited, and it was glowing. And then it said, except for the notes that were just a mess. And I was like, oh
Oh.
no. And then of course, with this, amazing mentor I had, I went to the office on Monday morning and I was
Hmm.
taking my head in shame. And she was like, well, when we make mistakes, it's in black and white for everybody to see. She said, but
Hmm.
everybody makes mistakes. And she was really gracious about it, as was the author. But, for a long time, I just I didn't have a frame of reference for like different things that I was finding in notes, archives, things like that. And it wasn't
Hmm.
clicking to me,
Hmm.
Um, and that grad school experience helped a lot, just to, when you're coming across things, they're
Hmm.
in your, they're in your brain. But if you're, coming from a certain experience where that's not even like, you don't know anything about archives, that's, you know, um, not part of your, I don't want to say your everyday, but just what you're exposed to, then you kind of don't have a frame of reference when you're going through that kind of material.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
I forgot what you asked me first.
Uh, I don't know if my question, I think you already answered it. My next question was going to be your master's in public administration. How has it helped you do your job? But I think you did answer that. And I think any experience you get is, I
Yes,
mean, we're copy editors. Anything
right.
we learn, anything we do, but it's interesting that it's not just about the material, but the thinking process and
Yes.
sort of getting used to the approach. Um, is great for a copy editor. Um, I think we have a few more minutes, so if anybody has any questions, jump in now.
Yeah.
Um, your you always ask about COVID, or you often ask about COVID in your um, interviews. That probably wasn't there when you started, or when did you start
Yeah.
outside the book?
Well, I started it in the middle of, well, not in the middle, but yeah, it was a few months into COVID. I think it was
Oh,
in
okay.
June or something like that of last year. Yeah, everything's a
Mhm.
blur, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It seems like it's been around for a long time, but now that you mention it, yeah, it's fairly.
Yes, that
So
is
do you do one
something.
a week, or what's the
Yeah.
frequency?
So
Yeah.
once a week, a new interview every Tuesday. Um,
Okay.
and like I said, this year I've just started trying to bring in more professors and students to the site. And I thought, it could be all these aspirations so that this site is still getting fine tuned, but I thought, to explore all these different aspects of the profession. Like, what are professors teaching? What are students hoping to do once they have, whatever degree that they're working on, and when they enter the profession, like, what are their hopes as they're, entering the profession? And then,
Hmm.
what are seasoned editors, how do they approach the job? So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm careful to try to stay in my lane. At one point, I was thinking, oh, I could have all these diversity articles. And I was like, Conscious Style Guide does that. Like, you need to, make
Hmm.
sure that you're focusing on the things that the people are going to come to the site for. So um, I'm
Hmm.
trying to do like these interviews and just boost a lot of what's already out there, because there's so much stuff that's already out there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's probably getting new attention. The Editors of Color database, also Karen
Yeah.
Yin's um, creation. I don't know how many, I know you're on there. I don't know how many editors are on there, but if you ever run out of people to interview, you
Yes,
can.
exactly. Yes, there's a well of,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, I want to ask some questions that are like entirely unfair because, you know, I, I, there are, there are no, I have a feeling there are no answers, and it's just a matter of doing.
Yeah.
It's more the process of trying to do something um, than simply saying, Cynthia, what's the answer? And we'll go out and do it. But what would you like to see? What's the ultimate goal? Is it an individual goal, or is there a broader goal? Do you hope to change society with outside the book?
Yeah, I have no such aspirations. I know that's not gonna happen, but I don't know. It's still evolving, and obviously it's a volunteer effort. So I'm trying to figure out like what I can fit in and actually keep my sanity. But I've thought about bringing in more students and professors. I've also thought about there's this I guess it's an organization now, but it started off as just this Instagram page called Well Read Black Girl. And it was just this one woman's featuring all of the, I think every day she featured a quote in a book cover by, a Black woman author that she admired and that she had read. And then it just kind of snowballed into this thing where she edited this book that has different chapters on writing and reading by different well-known Black authors, and she does a conference every year that talks about writing and blogging and just celebrating Black literature. So I thought it would be really interesting if at some point um, you know outside the book could host a panel of editors talking about
Oh,
how they got started, from, very newbie editors to seasoned ones, and talking about how they approach the job, things like that.
mhm.
But I think before I get there, I actually have to get in touch with these younger editors, and I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah. How are you getting in touch with editors then? What's the process?
Yeah, some of it is LinkedIn. Early in the
Mm.
pandemic, which was a horrible time, I was reaching out to professors, and that was the worst time to reach out to professors because they were all like, well,
Right.
what's our plan and what are we going to do? So I think now um, things are a little bit, from what I've seen, a little bit looser, where maybe I can get in contact with some professors and actually get in contact with some of their students from there, right? Um, and that's already happened. I've had a few professors recommend some students for interviews. So once that
Mm-hmm.
starts to catch on, I think then I'll know like how to target this to the student audience, because I'll kind of know what they want. But right now I'm just kind of putting the stuff out there, and while it's getting a lot of good reception from the people who are already editors, that's
Mm.
kind of not.
Right. The goal is to show people that
Yeah,
there's a path into editing and that they
right. And it
belong
can
as
have two
editors.
purposes, right? I mean,
Sure.
yeah, so I think it does have benefit of showing diversity in people who are already established in the field. But yeah, the goal is to bring in more people.
Right. Right. And it's interesting to people like me who always are interested in the community. Beyond the people I know.
Right.
There are some familiar faces on the blog, and there are some people especially young people who I don't know of, and it's interesting to hear from them and hear
Yeah.
their stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, even, I mean, I have to like limit my time there, but even just like dipping my toe into the editing community on Twitter, just see so many new faces and so many people to learn from. I mean, it can be overwhelming. So
Hmm.
just a lot of good folks out there.
Yeah. Is it are are there? I mean, any time you start something like this, it's always slow to get sort of the message out. So, are you reaching? Do you think people who are looking for resources in editing?
Well, I got a call from an email and then a call from a professor in Colorado. And it gave me a little bit of hope because she said that she had been looking for other resources for her class and that they go through the interviews, they read through them as a group. And so I thought, okay, well, that seems like that's a helpful resource. And, if, maybe other professors can come to the site and either, like maybe one of the people who are featured on the site are local to where the university is and they can bring them in as a featured guest or something.
Hmm.
So I feel like it is catching on, but slowly. I think when I was first reaching out and I had like one interview, people were like, well, who are you or whatever. But I think more now, I feel like when I'm reaching out to people, they kind of feel like, okay, you're on to something here, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love the idea of the panel discussion. I think the outside the book panel discussion webinar, or maybe at a conference, if we ever do a conference again.
We can see each other, and yes, exactly, in
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
So I think I've maybe time for one more question. What is Sam Enslin really like? I don't think she's
Sam
watching. You can tell
Sam
the
is the
truth.
real deal. Sam is the real deal. Sam is genuine, and I don't know. I've not had, and this isn't to say anything about any other work experience I've had, but I've not had this open and like trust filled a work experience in my life. So
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
is, yeah, Sam is
I
the real
I
deal.
Yeah, we should tell people who don't know Sam Enslin is Samantha Enslin is head of Dragonfly Editorial, and she's also vice president of
Okay,
ACES.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
so we're good friends. I know her very well, having worked with her from that through that. So.
Yeah.
And another thing we saw before the show started, we saw your cat. Have you? Is your cat sleeping? Is your cat on your lap? Where is your?
He's sleeping.
It's really a thing that people like to see the cats, but if
I'll show the cat because I like to
really,
show the cat. Hold
all right, all right.
on.
Last thing, we'll have the
Last thing, we'll have the kitty cat.
All right.
Yeah, I
Everybody
think
else can get
we're
your cats, and
good. He is a really
I
nice kitty. Yeah.
yeah, I have no cat. I can't ever do that, but I know people appreciate it. So
Some
um,
people like it. Yeah.
yeah. All right, we've run out of time. It's been a wonderful hour of talking about this stuff. I honestly, it's like you want to, like I said, I want to put everything on your shoulders and say, how do we solve the problem of diversity in the editing field? Um, and there's no easy answer, but stuff that you're doing and other people are doing are certainly putting it out there and making us more aware and hopefully encouraging some change.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And
All
change
right.
is happening. We just don't always see it. It's on the organizational level. So that's to be
Right.
appreciated too.
Right. I mean, it is getting better, right? I mean, I've been in the field for 30 years, and it was a problem 30 years ago, and it's still a problem today, and I imagine it'll still be a problem in 30 years, but I think it's better now than it was
Yeah.
then, and it's going to continue to get better.
Yeah.
Um, well, thank you very much. It's been
Anytime.
wonderful. In 2 weeks, we've got a different show. A little bit where we'll have we'll have multiple guests because we're going to celebrate Grammar Day, which is March 4th. Our show's on March 2nd, so we're going to have Martha Brockenbrough, the creator of Grammar Day, National Grammar Day, 20 years ago or something like that. Maybe not that long. Mignon Fogarty, the host, Grammar Girl, the host of National Grammar Day, is going to be here. We're going to have Andy Hollenbeck reading some poetry, and we may do some other fun things. So everybody come back in 2 weeks, March 2nd, for that show. Um, Thanks very much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.